Have you ever looked at the person you've shared your life with, the person whose breathing rhythm you know better than your own, and realize, in a single terrifying heartbeat, that you are looking at a complete stranger? It's a quiet truth that nobody warns us about when we are young. We think time binds us closer, knitting our souls together until they are inseparable. But sometimes, time just gives us more space to hide from one another. There are betrayals that happen with a shout, with a slamming door, with a glass thrown against a wall. But the ones that truly break us, they usually start with silence. They start in the quiet corners of a room we used to call home. That evening, the rain was soft against the windows. It was that steady, gray drizzle that usually made our kitchen feel like a sanctuary. For years, this room had been the heartbeat of our lives. It was where we drank our coffee in the groggy haze of the morning, where we paid bills on Sunday nights, where we laughed over burnt toast and cheap wine. I was stirring the pasta sauce on the stove, the wooden spoon scraping the bottom of the pot in a rhythm I had performed 1,000 times. The smell of garlic and basil filled the air, the scent of comfort, or at least it should have been. But tonight, the air felt sour. It was heavy, charged with a static that made the hair on my arm stand up. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally off. It wasn't a frantic feeling, but a low, dull ache in the pit of my stomach. Megan stood by the sink. Her back was to me. She was staring out the window into the dark, wet backyard. Her posture was stiff, her arms crossed tight against her chest, as if she were holding herself together physically. I watched her for a moment, the spoon stilled in my hand. We had been married 7 years. In the grand scheme of a life, 7 years might not seem like a lifetime, but it is long enough to know the language of someone's body. I knew her tired slump. I knew her angry stance. But this was something cold. It was a wall. "Megan," I said. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet room, even though I had spoken softly. I walked over, stepping carefully across the tile, and gently touched her arm. "You've barely spoken all day. Are you okay?" I expected her to lean into the touch. I expected a sigh, a complaint about her boss, a tired smile. Instead, she flinched. It was subtle, a microscopic tightening of her muscle under my hand. But I felt it. She didn't look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on her own reflection in the darkened window. "My stomach hurts," she muttered. That was it. 3 words. No softness. No glance. Just a clipped sentence delivered with the flat effect of a stranger who had been inconvenienced by a passerby. It felt like I had stepped out of line just by existing in the same room. I stepped back slightly, confused. My hand fell to my side. "Okay," I said slowly, trying to bridge the gap that had suddenly opened between us. "Is it something serious? Do you need anything?" I said I'm fine. Her voice was sharper now, like a jagged piece of glass. She finally looked down, but only at the empty sink, refusing to meet my eyes. I nodded, taking a breath. I tried to remind myself that people have bad days. That pain makes us short-tempered. I gave her space, moving back to the stove, but the silence she left behind wasn't empty. It was hostile. After a moment, I couldn't pretend anymore. I turned off the burner. "Megan," I tried again, keeping my tone level. "You've been distant all week. It's not just tonight. If there's something going on, we need to talk. I'm not trying to push, but..." She whipped around so fast the dish towel slipped from her shoulder and hit the floor. Her eyes were blazing, but not with the anger of a bad day. It was the anger of someone who had been waiting for a fight. "Eric, not everything is about you," she snapped. "Just drop it." The words landed like a physical slap. I stared at her, genuinely stunned. "Where is this coming from?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm asking because I care about you." "Maybe I'm just tired of pretending everything is fine when it's not," she shouted, her voice rising, cracking the calm atmosphere of the house. "I can't even breathe in this house without being questioned." Questioned? I took a step closer, bewildered. "Megan, I asked if you were okay. That's not an interrogation. That's what a husband does. That's what partners do." "Oh, spare me the husband routine," she scoffed. waving a hand dismissively in my face. You want me to smile, cook dinner, sit across from you, and act like you don't smother me? My jaw clenched. The accusation felt absurd, yet it was delivered with such venom that it made me question my own reality for a second. So now I smother you because I care? She laughed, and it was a bitter, hollow sound. Because you control everything, Eric. Even how I feel. You manage the bills, the house, the plans, and now you want to manage my mood. That hit something deep. It wasn't just an insult. It was a rewriting of our entire history. I stood there, my heart thudding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I watched this woman, my wife, say things that felt rehearsed. It didn't feel like an outburst. It felt like a script she had been practicing in the shower, waiting for the right moment to perform. "Megan," I said softly, fighting to keep the tremor out of my voice. "If you need space, take it. But don't rewrite history to justify pushing me away. We are a team. We always have been." "I'm not pushing you away," she hissed, leaning in, her eyes cold and hard. "You just don't fit into the version of my life I want right now." There it was. The truth, naked and ugly. The silence after that was deafening. All I could hear was the rain tapping the glass, softer now, indifferent to the wreckage in the kitchen. I could hear the sound of my own breath, shallow and ragged. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't throw the wooden spoon or slam my fist on the counter. When you are young, you think fighting requires noise. When you are older, you realize the most devastating battles are fought with quiet resignations. I just nodded. I stepped back, like I finally understood something I'd been blind to for a long time. "Okay," I whispered. That night, I slept on the couch. Not because she asked me to, but because I couldn't bring myself to lie beside someone who looked at me with that much contempt. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the house settle. We'd been married 7 years. The mortgage was halfway paid off. 2 cars sat in the driveway. We had dinners with friends on Saturdays. We were stable. We were the couple people looked at and said, "They're good." But lying there in the dark, with the ghost of her words still hanging in the air, I realized something foundational had cracked. It wasn't just a bad fight. It was a fracture in the bedrock. And as I closed my eyes, praying for sleep that wouldn't come, I had no idea just how deep that crack would go or what terrible things would crawl out of it. The morning sun has a way of mocking you when your world is falling apart. You expect the weather to match your internal landscape, for the sky to remain gray and weeping. But that next morning, the sunlight crept into the blinds like nothing had happened. It washed over the hardwood floors, highlighting dust motes dancing in the air. Outside, birds were chirping with an enthusiasm that felt offensive. The world was waking up fresh, while I felt like I hadn't slept in a decade. Our kitchen, the site of the previous night's war zone, looked deceptively normal in the daylight, but the air was still stale. I was already up, standing at the edge of the bed, fully dressed. My shirt was tucked in, my belt buckled, armor for a day I wasn't ready to face. Megan was still under the covers, her back to me. She was a lump of silence in a room that used to be filled with our morning murmurs. She hadn't come out to the couch last night. She hadn't even checked if I'd eaten dinner after she stormed off. That realization sat heavy in my chest. In 20 years of knowing people, you learn that even in anger, love usually leaves a breadcrumb trail of care. A blanket thrown over you, a text message, something. But there was nothing. I rubbed the back of my neck, trying to loosen a knot of tension that had set up camp there. I cleared my throat gently. "Morning," I said. I tried to keep it light, offering a bridge back to normalcy. She didn't move. I called Dr. Benson's office. I continued, assuming the practical role I always played. "They can see you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I waited for a thank you. I waited for her to roll over and say, "That's sweet. I really don't feel well." Silence. "I just want to be sure everything's okay with your stomach," I added, feeling the need to justify kindness. "You've been saying it hurts." I thought it was worth checking. Still nothing. Then the comforter shifted abruptly. She shot up like a spring, her hair messy, her eyes glaring at me with a mixture of shock and fury. "You what?" I took a small step back, caught off guard by the venom in her tone. I made an appointment, just to be safe." Her eyes narrowed into slits. "Who told you to do that?" "No one told me, Megan. You've been saying you don't feel well. You snapped at me yesterday because of pain, said you were sick. So I did the normal thing. I called the doctor." She sat up fully now, crossing her arms over her chest, pulling the juve up like a shield. "You're unbelievable. You think because I said my stomach hurts, you get to start organizing my entire life?" I blinked, genuinely confused. "Megan, it's a checkup. That's all. You don't have to go if you don't want to." "Oh, how generous," she sneered, swinging her legs out of bed. "But that's not why you did it, is it? The real reason you did it is because you don't trust me. That's what this is about, right?" "What? No. Yes." Her voice cracked, and her eyes went wide with something deeper than anger. It looked like panic. "You're trying to control me, Eric. You think if I don't act the way you expect, you get to manage me like some kind of project. Like I'm one of your biology students who needs to be corrected." I held up my hands, palms out, a gesture of surrender. "Calm down. You told me you didn't feel good. I was trying to help. That's not control. That's concern." She was pacing now, pulling open drawers and slamming them shut with unnecessary force. "You know what? You've always been like this. Quiet, nice, reasonable, but underneath that, you're always keeping tabs, always monitoring me like I'm going to slip up." My voice dropped, turning serious. "Is there something you're afraid of slipping up about? Is there something you were trying to hide?" She froze mid-step. That question hit a nerve. Her whole body went still, like a deer catching the scent of a predator. Then her lips curled into something between disgust and fear. "Unbelievable," she whispered. "You think I'm lying now? That I'm making it up?" I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at her. She picked up a throw pillow from the accent chair and launched it across the room. It hit the wall with a soft thud, a pathetic exclamation pointing to her rage. "God, I can't breathe in this house." "I'm not stopping you from breathing," I said quietly, holding my ground. "I asked if you want to see a doctor." She turned on me, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "No, you scheduled it. You didn't ask. That's the difference." I exhaled slowly, trying not to meet fire with fire. Anger is easy. Patience is hard. "You're right. I didn't ask. Maybe I should have. But I didn't think asking was necessary when my wife said she was in pain." She didn't want to hear it. She stormed past me into the bathroom, yanking the door open so hard the hinges rattled. "You're trying to paint yourself as the calm one. Huh? The good guy. But it's all manipulation. I'm not your patient, Eric." The door slammed. I stood there alone in the bedroom, staring at the wood grain of that closed door. I wondered how we had arrived here. Just days ago, we were watching that ridiculous cooking show on the couch. Megan had been curled up beside me, her head on my shoulder, her laughter making me forget every stress from work. Now, she was accusing me of trying to control her life because I booked a doctor's appointment. I glanced over at the framed photo on our dresser. It was us in Asheville last fall, hiking up a ridge. Her cheeks were flushed from the wind, her smile so real it practically glowed through the glass. I used to look at that picture and see my future. I knew her like I knew my own hands. But this woman in the bathroom, this wasn't her. Or maybe it was, and I was just now seeing it for the first time. A few minutes later, she stormed out of the bathroom. She had a bag slung over her shoulder, her face scrubbed raw, still damp from washing off whatever mask she was wearing. "I'll be back later," she snapped, brushing past me without making eye contact. "Where are you going?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. She stopped in the hallway and turned back. Her eyes were glassy hard. "I'm not reporting my every move to you, Eric." And with that, she left. The front door closed with finality that echoed through the entire house. I stayed in the bedroom for a long time, listening to the silence settle around me like dust. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger takes energy, and I felt drained. I was worried. I was confused. But beneath that confusion, something colder had started to form in my gut. It was doubt, not just about the argument or her mood, but about what had really changed in her. When someone reacts to kindness with hostility, it's usually because the kindness feels like a spotlight they don't want shining on them. I walked over to the window and watched her car back out of the driveway. She didn't look back at the house. She just drove away, escaping a prison of her own making. And as I stood there, I realized that I wasn't just losing an argument. I was losing the plot of my own life. 3 days passed. In a marriage, 3 days of silence can feel like 3 years. Megan didn't reschedule the doctor's visit, and I didn't bring it up again. We fell into a rhythm that many couples know too well, the polite avoidance dance. We passed each other in the hallway like roommates who didn't want to disturb the other's peace. We talked about the weather. We talked about bills. We talked about everything except the giant, gaping hole in the center of our living room. By Friday, we were both pretending like nothing had happened. It is amazing how much energy we waste trying to keep the surface of the water smooth while the current underneath is dragging us out to sea. Emily and Brian, our closest couple friends, were hosting a small get-together in their backyard. It was a standard Friday night ritual for us. Grilled burgers, a fire pit, cheap beer, and the kind of easy laughter that comes from knowing people for a decade. It was supposed to be a break from the tension. I thought, maybe, just maybe, being around friends would remind Megan of who we were. I thought it might bring us back to solid ground. I was wrong. Megan dressed carefully that evening. Too carefully. She wore a blue sundress I hadn't seen in months, the one that tied at the waist and caught the light when she moved. She left her hair loose over her shoulders and applied a light gloss to her lips. She stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, adjusting an earring, critical of her own reflection. She looked beautiful. But as I watched her from the doorway, I realized with a pang of sadness that she wasn't dressing up for me. There was no, how do I look? There was no spin for my approval. This was a presentation, but I wasn't the audience. We pulled into their driveway around 6 o'clock. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. Emily hugged us both at the door, smelling of perfume and charcoal. Brian clapped me on the back, like always, a solid, friendly thud. "Good to see you, buddy," he said. It felt routine. It felt familiar. But the moment we stepped into the backyard, something in Megan shifted. It was like a light switch had been flipped. The sullen, quiet woman who had been haunting my house for 3 days evaporated. In her place was someone vibrant, electric. I saw in the way she smiled, wider than usual, just a little too bright, a little too eager. "Eric, grab a drink," she said, brushing past me toward the table where Brian stood by the cooler. I poured myself a soda, making small talk with Emily about her garden, but my attention was split. I was watching Megan. She stood beside Brian. She wasn't just standing near him. She was leaning in. It's a subtle thing, body language. You don't notice it until you have a reason to. She was laughing too quickly at whatever joke he'd made. Her hand brushed his arm. Not obviously, not for a long time, but long enough that it didn't look like an accident. It was a linger, a touch that said, "I am here." I walked over to join them, sliding my arm gently around her shoulder. It was a claim, a reminder. "Hey," I said. She flinched. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't jump away, but her posture stiffened instantly. It was a microscopic rejection. A second later, she took a small, seemingly natural step forward to grab a napkin, letting my arm fall away into the empty air. It was smooth. If you were watching from a distance, you wouldn't have seen it, but I felt it. Brian didn't react visibly, but his gaze flicked to Megan, then to me, then back to his drink. There was a weight in that look, a shared secret suspended in the air between them. Megan turned to Emily, her voice high and cheerful. "Do you still have that Chardonnay from last weekend?" Emily nodded, already walking to the kitchen to retrieve it. And there we were, just the three of us. The air felt thin. I looked at Brian. "Busy week?" "Yeah," he said, not meeting my eyes. He was peeling the label off his beer bottle with intense concentration. Always is. You know how it goes. Megan stepped closer to him, not enough to be obvious to a stranger, but just enough to close the personal space. Brian's been working on that big project downtown, she said, answering for him. She looked at him with a pride that felt misplaced. Why did she know more about his week than I did? The rest of the night blurred into wine, smoke from the fire pit, and background laughter. But for me, the world had narrowed down to a single focal point. Every time I looked over, Megan wasn't near me. She was always near Brian. It was like they were magnets with a pull only they could feel. I watched her laugh at his stories. Stories I'd heard a dozen times. Stories that weren't that funny. She leaned forward when he talked, her chin resting on her hand, eyes fixed on his face. She touched her hair, tucking it behind her ear, a gesture she used to do with me in the early days of our courtship. It is a painful thing to see your spouse flirt with someone else using the same moves they used to capture your heart. It feels like theft. Once, as Emily handed out drinks, I caught Megan looking at Brian across the fire. It wasn't just a look. It was a gaze. It was heavy, laden with history I didn't know about. It lingered for half a second too long to be platonic. He looked back quickly, then away, like a child caught with his hand in the jar. They were both pretending not to know what the other was thinking, but the electricity between them was loud enough to drown out the crackling fire. I didn't say anything. I didn't cause a scene. I just smiled and passed Megan her drink like I hadn't noticed a thing. But I had. I had noticed everything. Every touch, every flinch, every glance. I felt the entire night like I was watching a play where I was the only actor who hadn't been given the script. When the night finally ended and we got back in the car, the silence returned. But it was different now. It wasn't just the silence of an argument. It was the silence of a secret. Megan hummed softly to herself, scrolling on her phone, the blue light illuminating her face. She seemed lighter, happier than she had been all week. The tension in her shoulders was gone. Not once did she look at me. Not once did she say, "That was fun," or "Did you have a good time?" She was in her own world, a world where I no longer existed. I gripped the steering wheel, watching the road stretch out before us in the headlights. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask who she was texting. I didn't ask why she flinched when I touched her. But inside, something was shifting quietly, permanently. The doubt I had felt that morning was gone. It had hardened into something much colder, much sharper. I wasn't confused anymore. I was suspicious. And for the first time, I knew that I wasn't just fighting for my marriage. I was fighting to find out what was real. The man driving that car was no longer just a husband. He was a witness. And the trial had just begun. There is a specific kind of heaviness that settles in your chest when you stop trusting the person you sleep next to. It isn't a sharp pain, like a fresh wound. It is more like carrying a stone in your pocket that gets a little heavier every single day. You try to ignore it. You try to walk normally. But the weight is always there, throwing you off balance, reminding you that something is wrong. It was a Tuesday when I finally decided I couldn't carry that stone alone anymore. I went to see Carl. He was an old friend of a friend, the kind of guy who existed in the margins of polite society. He was a former cop who had traded his badge for a quiet life as a private investigator. His office was located above a laundromat near downtown Raleigh. The staircase smelled of detergent and stale cigarette smoke. It wasn't the kind of place you went to celebrate good news. It was the kind of place you went when you had run out of other options. I pushed open the door. The office was small, cluttered with filing cabinets that looked like they hadn't been organized since the 90s. The carpet was older than I was, worn down to the threads in the center of the room. A coffee pot in the corner hissed, brewing a pot that smelled burnt before it was even finished. Carl sat behind a metal desk, looking at a stack of papers. He didn't look up immediately. He was a man of few words, a man who had seen enough of human nature to never be surprised by it. "Tell me exactly what you're looking for," he said, finally raising his eyes. His voice was gravel, rough but not unkind. I sat down in the chair opposite him. It creaked under my weight. I hesitated. Saying it out loud made it real. Thinking it was one thing, but speaking the words into the air gave them a shape I couldn't take back. "I think my wife is hiding something. I said finally. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. And I don't think it's just a casual affair. Carl didn't flinch. He didn't offer sympathy. He just clicked his pen. You got a name? Brian, I said. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. Brian Harper. He's a close friend. He's married to my wife's best friend. Carl nodded slowly, scribbling on a yellow legal pad. No problem. I'll keep it clean. You'll get photos, timestamps, audio if I can get close enough. Nothing illegal, nothing messy. Just the truth. Just the truth. That was all I wanted. Or at least, that was what I told myself. In reality, I think a part of me was hoping he would find nothing. I was hoping he would come back and tell me I was a paranoid old fool, that my wife was faithful, and that I should go buy her flowers and apologize. But life rarely gives us the easy way out. A week later, I found myself back in that musty little office. The smell of detergent was still there, but this time, the air in the room felt thinner, tighter. Carl didn't greet me with small talk. He didn't ask about the weather. He just gestured toward the chair and turned a laptop screen toward me. You need to listen to this, he said. He pressed a key. The recording crackled slightly before settling into a steady hum. I could hear the sound of wind, the distant rush of traffic, the distinct noise of a car engine idling. It sounded lonely. Then, Megan's voice cut through the static. I'm late, like really late. I froze. My hands gripped the armrest of the chair, so hard my knuckles turned white. I bought 3 tests, Brian, she continued, her voice trembling in a way I hadn't heard in years. All positive. The silence on the tape was agonizing. Then Brian's voice. It was lower, tense, stripped of all the bravado I was used to hearing at backyard barbecues. Are you sure? Are you sure they're accurate? I'm standing in a hospital parking lot with a sonogram in my purse, she said. She sounded on the edge of hysteria. Yeah, I'm sure. Brian muttered a curse word under his breath. Then silence again. Just the ambient sound of the world, continuing to spin while my world stopped. A car passed in the recording. Someone coughed in the distance. I don't know what to do, Megan said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Brian, does Eric... No, she cut herself off, her tone shifting. It hardened, and he's not going to. Not yet. Carl paused the audio there. He looked at me. I was staring at the screen, my mind racing, trying to process the timeline. Pregnant. My wife was pregnant. And based on the panic in her voice, based on who she was telling, it wasn't mine. I couldn't speak at first. My jaw was tight, locked in place. Carl waited, respectful of the shock. Then he leaned forward slightly, his eyes serious. There's more, Eric. I looked at him. More. Keep listening, he said. He pressed play again. What are we going to do? Brian asked on the recording. If he finds out... He won't, Megan said. And this was the part that broke me. It wasn't the affair. It wasn't even the pregnancy. It was the tone of her voice. It was cold. It was calculating. It was a voice of a woman solving a math problem, not a woman in moral crisis. I'm going to list him, she said. What? Brian asked. I'm going to list Eric as the father on the hospital forms, she explained, as if she were talking about a grocery list. It's easier that way. For insurance. For the hospital records. For my reputation. If his name is on the birth certificate, it's clean. He won't ask questions if I handle it right. He trusts me. Carl stopped the recording. The room was silent. I sat there, stunned. I wasn't just dealing with betrayal anymore. I was dealing with a plan. A trap. She had made a decision to deceive me, not in the heat of passion, but in cold logic. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was planning to pin another man's child on me for the rest of my life. She was planning to use my name, my resources, my love, to cover up her mistake. She listed me? I asked. My voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. Carl nodded, said it straight to him. Eric's name goes on the records. It's clean. I pressed a hand to my mouth, biting back something between a laugh and a groan. It was so monstrous, it was almost funny. She thinks I'm that blind. I murmured. She thinks I'm just a prop in her life. Carl slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside are the stills, he said. Megan and Brian, leaning on a car in the hospital parking lot, her hand resting on her stomach, his face pale. It confirms everything on the tape. I opened the folder. There they were, grainy, zoomed in, but unmistakable. My wife, my best friend, conspiring to steal my future. You okay? Carl asked. I looked up at him. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of burnt coffee and dust. And for the first time in weeks, the confusion was gone. The stone in my pocket was gone. It had been replaced by a sword. Yeah, I said slowly, closing the folder. I am, because now I had clarity. The story wasn't mystery anymore. It was a tragedy, yes, but it was a tragedy I now controlled. I knew the ending, and I knew exactly what I had to do next. There are places in this world that demand honesty. A courtroom is one. A church is another. And a hospital should be a place of absolute truth. It is where life begins and ends, where bodies are broken and healed. You don't expect to find fiction written on medical charts. But as I walked to the automatic sliding doors that morning, I knew I was walking into a story that had been fabricated with terrifying precision. The hospital smelled the way they all do, antiseptic, floor wax, and the faint, underlying scent of anxiety. It was just after 9 a.m. The morning rush was calming down. I walked with my hands steady in my pockets, my heartbeat slow and controlled. I checked myself in the reflection of the glass doors. I didn't look like a man whose life had been incinerated. I looked like a husband. I looked like a man coming to check on his wife's paperwork. And in a way, that is exactly what I was. No rage, no shaking, just purpose. That was the mantra repeating in my head. At the front desk, a young nurse looked up. She had a kind face, tired eyes, and a name tag that read Sarah. She smiled politely, the automatic smile of someone who deals with worried relatives all day. "How can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here about my wife," I said calmly. My voice didn't waver. "Megan Harper." She typed for a moment, the clicking of the keys sounding like gunfire in the quiet lobby. "She isn't currently admitted, sir. Was she here for an appointment?" "She had some tests done recently," I said. "I just need to clarify some information on the intake forms. We were worried there might have been a mix-up with the insurance." The nurse narrowed her eyes slightly, just doing her job. "Are you listed as immediate family?" "I'm her husband, Eric Harper." She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. In today's world, privacy is everything. She couldn't just hand over a file. "I'll need to confirm your identity," she said softly. I slid my driver's license across the cool laminate counter. She picked it up, studied the photo, glanced back at the screen, then back at me. Her expression softened. She handed the license back. "You're listed as a father," she said quietly. There it was, printed reality. Hearing it on a recording in a dusty PI's office was one thing. Hearing a stranger say it to my face, reading it from an official medical database, was something else entirely. It made the lie cold. It made it flat. It made it official. "Yes," I replied. "That's correct." "One moment," she said, nodding. "I can print a summary of the visit for your records." She disappeared down the hall. I stood there alone, watching a janitor push a mop bucket past me. The water in the bucket was gray. The rhythm of the mop slapping the floor was hypnotic. I wondered if the janitor knew how many secrets these floors held. I wondered if he could scrub away the kind of stain my wife was leaving on our lives. A few minutes later, Sarah returned. She was holding a thin folder, but she wasn't alone. A doctor had stepped out with her, scanning a chart. He was a man in his late 40s, with calm eyes and the practiced warmth of someone who delivers news, good and bad, for a living. "Mr. Harper?" he asked, extending a hand. "Yes," I said. "Dr. Evans." He introduced himself. He smiled, and it was genuine. "Sarah mentioned you were asking about the intake forms. I just wanted to say congratulations." I looked at his hand. It was suspended in the air between us. A gesture of goodwill. A gesture of celebration. I took it. I shook the hand of the man who was congratulating me on the conception of a child that belonged to my best friend. "Thank you," I replied. The words felt strange in my mouth, like stones I had to spit out. "She's early," the doctor continued, oblivious to the fact that he was speaking to a ghost. "But everything looks stable so far. The hormone levels are strong. We'll schedule the next scan soon to check for a heartbeat." "Of course," I said evenly. "We want to be sure everything is healthy." He nodded again, releasing my hand. "Try to be there for her. These early weeks can be overwhelming for a mother. Hormones, anxiety, she needs support." "I will," I said. And technically that was true. I would be there, just not in the way he thought. The nurse turned the folder toward me on the counter. "You can review this here if you'd like. It's the copy of the intake and the insurance filing." I opened it slowly. It felt heavy, though it was just paper. Inside were the printed forms. I scanned past the medical jargon, past the dates, past the insurance codes. My eyes hunted for one thing, and I found it right there at the bottom of the page in standard black ink. Father, Eric Harper. Not Brian. Not unknown. Me. My name. My legacy. My financial future. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had signed a document. She had taken a pen or typed on a keyboard and deliberately assigned the consequences of her affair to me. It was a theft of my identity as a father. It was a theft of my right to choose. I stared at the name for a long time. I wanted to memorize the font. I wanted to burn the image into my mind so that if I ever felt weak, if I ever felt like forgiving her, I could call this image up and remember exactly what she was capable of. I closed the folder carefully, as if it might bite me. "I appreciate your help," I said to the nurse. "Everything looks correct." She smiled, relieved. "Of course, Mr. Harper. Let us know if you need anything else." The doctor gave one last nod. "Take care of your family." "I intend to," I answered. Then I turned and walked down the hallway. Each step on the linoleum echoed too loudly, like the building itself was listening to my exit. I walked past the waiting area where anxious husbands sat wringing their hands. I walked past the gift shop filled with balloons and teddy bears. I stepped back out into the cool morning air. The sliding doors hissed shut behind me. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that didn't smell like antiseptic. I checked my hands. They were still steady. I didn't feel anger in that moment. Anger is hot. Anger is messy. What I felt was something far more dangerous. I felt precision. A trap had been built for me. A complex, emotional, legal trap designed to ensnare me for the next 18 years. And I had just walked right up to the edge of it, looked down into the pit, and decided I wasn't going to fall. I walked to my car, unlocked the door, and sat in the driver's seat. I didn't start the engine immediately. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I looked at the black screen. The evidence was gathered. The PI had the photos and the audio. The hospital had confirmed the paperwork. The circle was closed. There was no mystery left to solve. There was only the execution of the end. I started the car. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I realized that the man who had driven in here 20 minutes ago, the hopeful, confused husband, was gone. He had been left back at the front desk. The man driving away was someone else. Someone who knew that the only way to survive a lie this big is to stop playing the victim and start playing the judge. I drove home. I had a dinner to prepare. I had a role to play for just a little while longer. Because when you're planning to drop a bomb on your own life, you have to make sure everyone is standing in exactly the right spot before you light the fuse. We often think we can fix a broken window by hanging a pretty curtain over it. We tell ourselves that if we just set the mood right, if we say the right soft words, we can hide the jagged glass underneath. But the wind still gets in. The cold still finds its way through. And eventually, you have to admit that the window is shattered, no matter how beautiful the fabric is that covers it. That evening, I came home to a performance. Our bedroom looked like something out of a magazine advertisement for a perfect marriage. The overhead lights were off. The room was bathed in the warm, flickering glow of candles, lavender scented. Sitting on the dresser, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. It was soft. It was inviting. It was a lie. Megan stood near the foot of the bed. She was wearing silk the color of deep red wine. It was a gown I hadn't seen in years, one she used to save for anniversaries or birthdays. The fabric rippled like water as she shifted her weight. She glanced up at me with a soft, carefully constructed smile. "Hey," she said. I stood in the doorway, my hand still on the brass knob. I felt like an intruder in my own room, or perhaps like an audience member who had arrived late to a play. "Hey," I replied, unbuttoning my cuffs. My voice was flat. She crossed the room to the nightstand, adjusting the wick of a candle that didn't need adjusting. It was busy work. It was something to do with her hands. "You were quiet at dinner," she said, her back to me. "I had a long day," I said. She paused, nodding slowly as if she accepted that explanation. Then she turned. "I thought maybe we could just be us tonight." Her voice was low, sweet, intentional. She stepped closer, and the air between us filled with her perfume. It was a scent she only wore on special occasions, the one that used to make me stop mid-sentence when she passed by. It used to smell like desire. Now it smelled like desperation. "You look nice," I said. I kept my tone carefully neutral. It was a statement of fact, not a compliment. Her fingers reached out and touched my chest, trailing up toward my collar. Her touch was light, but it felt heavy to me. "I was hoping you'd say that." I met her eyes. They were soft, but behind the softness, I saw the calculation. She was watching me, gauging my reaction, checking to see if the spell was working. She leaned in, her lips grazing my jaw. "It's been a while," she whispered. I stepped back. It wasn't a shove. It was a small movement, just enough to put 6 inches of air between us. But in a marriage, 6 inches can be a canyon. "I'm tired," I said, quiet but clear. Her face didn't change at first. She held the smile for a second too long, waiting for the punchline. Then she blinked. Her lips parted slightly, as if I had just spoken to her in a language she didn't understand. Rejection wasn't part of the script she had written for tonight. "Oh," she said, her hand falling from my chest. I know you have a lot on your mind." "Work?" she asked. I walked over to the dresser, took off my watch, and set it down. The metal clicked against the wood. It was the only sound in the room. "Among other things," I said. She wrapped her arms around herself, that silk gown shifting with her. The confidence was leaking out of the room. "You've been distant lately, Eric." "You think so?" I asked, looking at her reflection in the mirror. She didn't answer immediately. She tried again, her voice dropping to a register that was meant to be vulnerable. "I miss us, Eric. Don't you?" I turned around and leaned against the dresser, crossing my arms. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing the safety net I provided. "You missed a version of me that didn't ask questions," I said. She gave a short, nervous laugh. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't reply. I let the question hang there, unanswered. She moved to sit on the edge of the bed, the mattress creaking slightly under her weight. She looked small suddenly. "I'm trying here," she said, her voice rising just a fraction. "I'm lighting candles. I'm showing up. I'm trying to make things nice. What else do you want from me?" I looked at her for a long moment. What did I want? Did I want honesty? That was too far gone. Did I want answers? I already had them in a folder in my car. All I wanted right now was for her to sit in the discomfort she had built, instead of hiding behind perfume and mood lighting. "You don't need to try," I said. "Not tonight." Her shoulders slumped. "So you're rejecting me now? Is that it?" "I'm not rejecting you," I said gently. "I'm just tired." She looked away, and there it was, the first real crack in her armor. Not rage, not manipulation, just uncertainty. The same woman who had been so sure of herself when she was conspiring in a hospital parking lot was now rattled by one simple word. "No." She rose from the bed slowly. "I thought maybe we could reset. Go back to how things were." I tilted my head. "When exactly do you think things changed?" She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing. Then she looked down at the candle beside her as if it might answer for her. She didn't have an answer, because to answer that question, she would have to admit what she had done. I turned toward the bathroom. "Good night, Megan." As I stepped out of the room, I didn't look back. Behind me, the candlelight flickered against the silence she had lit herself. The clock on my nightstand read 4:58 a.m. I hadn't slept, not a minute. I lay there in the dark, listening to the house breathe. Then I felt her body press against mine. Megan's hand brushed lightly across my chest. Her lips, soft and deliberate, found my neck. She didn't say anything at first. She just moved slowly, breathing warm against my skin. It was an attempt to bypass conversation, to slide back into the intimacy we used to have before words got in the way. Then came the whisper, "I miss you." It landed with the weight of a lie whispered in church. I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. I lay there like a stone. She kissed my shoulder. "I was thinking," she murmured against my skin. "Maybe we could start over. Just the two of us. No pressure. No tension. Just us again." I sat up without a word. I swung my legs off the bed and pulled a hoodie over my head. "Eric," she said softly, sitting up behind me. "Where are you going?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. If I spoke now, I would scream. I left the room, walked down the hall, and into the kitchen. The world still smelled like silence and cold tile. The fridge light spilled out across the floor as I opened the door. Eggs, butter, bread, the usual ingredients of a life that was supposed to be normal. I moved slowly, methodically. I was a man who had done this 1,000 times. Only now, everything had changed. Behind me, I heard her bare feet touch the floor. A moment later, the rustle of fabric, then the soft patter of her steps entering the kitchen. I cracked 2 eggs into the skillet. They hit the hot pan with a sharp hiss, cutting through the tension like a blade. Megan's voice followed, coated in sugar and strain. "You're just walking away?" "I'm making breakfast," I said without turning. "For who?" she asked. I could hear the frown in her voice. "Because it sure doesn't feel like you're still here with me." I flipped the eggs carefully. "You hungry?" She blinked. "Are you serious right now?" I finally turned to look at her. Her hair was messy from sleep. She was still wearing that silk robe, but it was wrinkled now. Her lips were still slightly glossed from whatever fantasy she was trying to recreate. I held her gaze. "Calm. Steady. You don't want eggs." "Eric, stop it," she snapped, stepping further into the kitchen. "You're doing that thing where you act like nothing matters. Like I didn't just try to talk to you. Like I didn't just try to open up to you. You kissed my neck," I said flatly. "That's not opening up." Her voice rose. "I'm trying to reconnect." "No, Megan," I replied evenly. "You're trying to erase something." She stopped. She bit her lip, shaking her head as if to shake off my words. "That's not the same thing. Why are you acting like I'm the enemy?" "I'm not acting," I said. "I just stopped pretending." That one cut deep. I saw it in her eyes. She leaned against the counter, her shoulders tight, her arms crossed defensively. "So this is it now?" she asked. "You don't talk to me? You make eggs and give riddles." I placed the eggs on a plate. I turned off the stove. The hiss of the gas died away. "Some things," I said, sliding the plate onto the table. "Don't need words anymore." "That doesn't mean anything," she snapped. "It does to me." She stared at me, arms still crossed like she was trying to keep herself from unraveling. "You think you know everything," she said. "You think you figured me out?" I met her eyes again. "I think I've stopped trying to convince myself that I don't already know." Her mouth opened, then closed. Nothing came out. I grabbed a second plate. I put a slice of bread in the toaster. I stood there, waiting for it to pop. Her breathing grew shallow. "I didn't want things to be like this," she whispered. I nodded. "Neither did I." "You don't even ask me what I'm feeling," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't want to be asked," I said, my voice low. "You want to be forgiven without having to explain." A beat of silence. She stepped forward, gently touching my arm. "Eric, I'm scared." I'm not saying everything right now because I don't know how. I didn't move away, but I didn't lean in. You had time. I still do, she whispered. The toast popped up with a loud clack. I grabbed it. I buttered both slices. I placed one next to her empty spot at the table and the other on my plate. She didn't sit. She just stood there, watching me, unsteady on her feet. Eat something, I said quietly. She stared at the plate, then at me. You're really going to do this? Just sit here and act like none of this is real. I looked at her, and for the first time in days, I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was a knowing one. I'm acting like it's very real, I said. She stepped back. Her eyes blinked fast, fighting back tears that were born of frustration, not sorrow. You're not supposed to be the one who pulls away. You'd be surprised, I murmured. Then I sat down. I picked up my fork. I took the first bite. She didn't move. She didn't touch the food. She just stood there in the dim light of the kitchen, her robe hanging off one shoulder, the flicker of morning light hitting her eyes like the truth she hadn't planned for. Her plan wasn't falling apart. It already had. And now, all that was left was the echo of the kitchen and the quiet click of my fork against porcelain. By noon, the sky had turned overcast. It was that flat, unrelenting gray light that hangs over Raleigh like a pause before a storm. It felt fitting. I parked my car in front of the law office, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a moment. My fingers tapped a slow, silent rhythm on the steering wheel. I wasn't here to scream. I wasn't here to burn bridges. I was here to build the exit. The building was brick and glass. It was quiet, serious, unassuming. It looked like a place where important things happened in hushed tones. Inside, the walls were lined with leather-bound books I doubted anyone had touched in years, but they gave the room a smell of old paper and authority. The secretary behind the desk greeted me with a tired smile. She looked like she had seen 1,000 husbands walk and looking exactly like me, shoulders tight, eyes looking for a lifeline. "You're Mr. Harper?" she asked. "Yes, Eric. Attorney Hayes will see you now." I followed her down a narrow hallway to a corner office. It was spacious, with glass panels looking out onto the gray street. There was an old wooden desk that looked like it had survived wars, and 2 chairs positioned strictly across from it. Mitchell Hayes stood up when I entered. He was a man in his early 50s, wearing a dark suit that fit too well. He had silver hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every kind of marriage unravel. He didn't smile warmly. He didn't offer false sympathy. He shook my hand with a firm grip. No warmth, just business. "You got something for me?" he asked, gesturing for me to sit. I pulled the folder from inside my coat. It felt heavy, not in weight, but in consequence. I placed it on the desk. Inside were the printouts of Carl's report, the transcripts of the recording in the parking lot, the timestamps, the photos of Megan and Brian, their faces pale in the harsh hospital lighting, the copy of the hospital paperwork showing my name listed as the father in black and white, and finally, a small silver flash drive, neatly labeled. "Proof," I said. Mitchell sat down. He opened the folder and began flipping through. He didn't rush. He didn't speak. He just scanned each page, one after the next, with the slow, steady pace of a man used to sorting through the ashes of other people's lives. I sat in silence. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of an air vent overhead, and the soft rasp of paper sliding over paper. It was agonizing, yet strangely calming. Here, in this room, my pain wasn't emotional. It was evidence. It was just data points on a page. When he reached the last page, he leaned back in his leather chair. He rested one hand on the file, looking at me over the rim of his reading glasses. "This," he said finally, "is airtight." I nodded once. "I'm not surprised." "You'll win everything," he continued, his voice devoid of excitement. It was just a fact. Custody rights, assets, public sympathy if that matters to you. She can try to fight, but it won't go far. Not with a fake paternity filing and evidence of an ongoing affair during conception window. "I'm not interested in dragging her through the mud," I said quietly. "I don't want a circus. I just want to be done. Clean. Mitchell tilted his head. Studying me, you understand what she did, Eric? This isn't just infidelity. She tried to lock you into legal fatherhood of a child that isn't yours. I understand, I said. She could have stayed quiet, he pressed, making sure I truly grasped the bullet I had dodged. She could have waited. She could have collected child support for 18 years. She could have bound you to that child and to her for the rest of your life. I nodded again. That's why I'm here now, before the damage gets deeper. Mitchell tapped the folder with his index finger. Smart man. Most people wait until the baby is born. They wait until they are emotionally attached. You came early. I came right after I stopped lying to myself. I replied. He leaned forward, sliding the file back toward himself like it was already part of a case in motion. I'll start the paperwork today. This will be fast. Surgical. I prefer quiet over fast, I said. I don't want her served at work. I don't want a scene. Mitchell gave a dry, thin smile. Quiet is easy when you're holding the truth. Noise is usually for the people who are lying. He pulled a legal pad closer and picked up a pen. We file for immediate separation. We file a motion to contest paternity based on the evidence. We freeze the joint assets. By the time she realizes what is happening, the walls will already be up. I watched him write. It was strange to see the dismantling of my marriage reduced to a series of bullet points on a yellow pad. 7 years of dinners, of vacations, of sleeping in the same bed, all of it being crossed out by a stranger in a suit. What about the house? I asked. It's marital property, Mitchell said without looking up. But given the fraud, we have leverage. We can likely negotiate her buying you out or forcing a sale where you take the majority. Do you want the house? I thought about the kitchen. I thought about the silence that lived there now. I thought about the ghost of the woman I used to love standing by the sink. No, I said. I don't think I do. Good, Mitchell said. Liquidating is cleaner. I stood up. My legs felt steady. Thank you. No need, he replied, standing as well. She's the one who gave you the case, Mr. Harper. You're just carrying it forward. I walked out of the office and back into the reception area. The secretary looked up again. This time, I didn't look like a man searching for a lifeline. I looked like a man who had found the rope and was climbing out. Outside, the clouds hadn't moved. The air was still thick and gray. But somehow it felt lighter to me. I didn't feel powerful. Power implies you are happy about the destruction. I didn't feel happy. I felt steady. For the first time in weeks, I knew exactly where I stood. I wasn't standing on quicksand anymore. I was standing on concrete. I got back in my car. I checked the time. It was early afternoon. The day was still going. I had to go back to that house. I had to sleep in that bed one more time. I had to look at Megan across the dinner table and pretend I didn't know that her life, as she knew it, was currently sitting in a file on Mitchell Hayes' desk. But it was easier now, because I knew the ending. I drove home slowly, watching the familiar streets pass by, the grocery store we shopped at, the park where we walked on Sundays. It all looked like a film set now, scenery for a play that had already held its closing night performance. When I pulled into the driveway, Megan's car was there. She was home early. I sat in the car for a minute, looking at the house. It looked the same as it always did. The lawn was mowed. The curtains were drawn. It looked like a home, but I knew better. It was just a building, and I was just a tenant waiting for his lease to expire. I took a deep breath, opened the car door, and walked up the path. The hardest part wasn't the leaving. The hardest part was the waiting for the moment to leave, and that moment was coming fast. Emily's house always had this warm, casual glow to it. It was the kind of place where bad things simply didn't happen. String lights were draped lazily over the backyard fence, casting a soft, amber hue over the grass. There was a rhythmic thump of music in the background, something old, something nostalgic. You could hear the clinking of ice in glasses and smell the charcoal smoke from a grill drifting through the evening air. If you stood in the center of that yard, surrounded by the laughter of people you had known for 10 years, you would think peace lived there. But tonight, that peace was a thin veneer. It was paint over rust. And I knew that by the end of the hour, I was going to strip it all away. Megan had dressed up too much for a simple backyard hangout. She wore a pale pink dress that was tight at the waist, paired with a gold necklace that caught the light every time she moved. Her hair was curled in perfect waves, bouncing against her shoulders. She looked manic. Her eyes sparkled with a restless, frantic energy, like someone about to pull off a magic trick in front of a skeptical crowd. She needed this night to go well. She needed witnesses. She needed to cement her reality before I could question it. Emily greeted us like she always did. Warm hugs. A quick, breathless welcome. "There's drinks by the cooler," she said, pointing toward the patio. "Burgers are almost done." Megan drifted into the conversation instantly. Her smile was wide, her voice a little louder, a little brighter than it had been in weeks. She laughed too hard at Brian's jokes. And Brian? He stood by the grill, flipping patties with a focus that bordered on obsession. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes that the porch lights couldn't hide. When he saw me, he offered a tight nod. A wave. The gesture of a man trying to act normal, while standing on a trapdoor. I stood near the edge of the group, nursing a soda. I let the party move around me like I was a stone in a river. I watched them. I watched my wife touch Brian's arm as she passed him a napkin. I watched Emily laugh at something Megan said, completely unaware that the woman she called her best friend was currently stealing her life. It is a strange thing to hold a grenade in your hand and watch everyone else act like it's a bouquet of flowers. Then I saw it happen. Megan moved to the center of the patio. She picked up a spoon and tapped it gently against her wine glass. Clink, clink, clink. The conversation died down. Heads turned. The music seemed to fade into the background. "I just want to say something real quick," Megan said. Her voice was sweet, clear, and projected perfectly to the small circle of friends. "I know the last few months have been a little quiet on our end. Life gets busy, you know?" She paused, looking around the circle, making eye contact with everyone except me. "But," she continued, a hand drifting to her stomach, "I think it's finally time to share the good news." I felt a cold twist in my gut. She was doing it. She was actually doing it. She was locking me in publicly. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were pleading, daring, terrified. "Eric and I," she said, her voice trembling just a touch, a perfect performance of emotion, "are having a baby." There was a beat of absolute silence. It lasted only a second, but it felt like an hour. Then the cheers erupted. Laughter. Clapping. Glasses were raised high. Finally, someone shouted from the back, "Congrats, man!" Another friend yelled, slapping me on the shoulder. Emily clapped her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide and glistening. "Oh my God, Megan, that's amazing." She rushed forward to hug her. And Brian just stood there, frozen by the grill. The color drained from his face, so fast it looked like he might faint. He looked like someone had just opened a door he thought he had locked and thrown away the key to. Megan beamed, basking in the adoration in the safety of the crowd. She turned to me, her smile tight. "Tell them, babe." This was my cue. This was the moment I was supposed to step forward, put my arm around her, and accept the shackles she had forged for me. I stepped forward. I lifted my glass slowly. The carbonation in my soda fizzed, the only sound I could hear over the rushing of blood in my ears. I looked at every person around that fire pit. I looked at Emily, so happy for us. I looked at Brian, so terrified. Then I smiled. It was the calmest I had felt in my entire life. Actually, I said, my voice was low, but it cut through the chatter like a knife through canvas. "You should probably toast Brian instead." The silence that followed was immediate. It was violent. No one laughed. No one moved. The smile on Emily's face froze, then slowly started to crumble as confusion set in. Brian blinked. Once. Twice. He looked down at the beer in his hand, as if he wished it would dissolve him. "Wait, what?" Emily asked, her voice small. She looked between us, trying to find a joke. I turned to her, still holding my glass steady. "Megan is pregnant." I said, "Clearly, that part is true." Megan's smile faltered. Her face went slack. "Eric." "But it's not mine," I continued, addressing the group but looking straight at Brian. Eric, what? What are you talking about? Megan's voice came out in a rush, breathless and high. She stepped toward me, reaching out a hand. You've had too much to drink. I'm drinking soda, Megan, I said calmly. I turned my gaze to Brian. He looked sick. You want to say anything, Brian? Or should I keep going? Emily turned to her husband. Her movements were jerky, robotic. Brian? Brian opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked like a fish gasping for air on a dock. He croaked. He's lying. Megan shouted suddenly. She looked around at our friends, her eyes wild. I don't know what he's talking about. He's been stressed. He's confused. He's upset about work. I reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out the flash drive. It was small, silver, insignificant looking. But in the firelight, it glinted like a weapon. Audio recording, I said, simply, you two in the hospital parking lot, discussing the positive tests, discussing how you were going to put my name on the birth certificate, to hide it. Your voice, his voice, it's all here. Brian finally spoke. His voice was cracked, broken. Megan, Emily's eyes snapped to him. What did you do? Megan lunged for me, trying to grab the drive. Eric, stop it. Please. We can fix this. You don't have to do this here. I stepped back, easily avoiding her grasp. This, I said softly, gesturing to the silent, horrified circle of our friends, is exactly where it needs to happen. You wanted witnesses. Megan, you wanted to make an announcement. Well, here it is. I looked at Brian one last time. Congratulations, Brian, I added, finishing the toast I had started. I hope you're ready for diaper duty, because I'm certainly not. Brian stepped back like he'd been physically hit. Emily covered her mouth again. Only this time it wasn't joy. It was nausea. She looked at Megan with a look that wasn't anger yet. It was pure, unadulterated revulsion. Megan's voice cracked, dissolving into tears. It was a mistake, Eric. I was going to tell you. I was scared. You weren't scared, I said, my voice devoid of pity. You were strategic. And then I turned. I walked across the yard, past the string lights that now looked cheap and tawdry. I walked past the cooler full of drinks. I walked past the friends who were staring at me with wide, shocked eyes, holding their cups like statues. The air in the yard was suffocating. No one dared to breathe. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see how it ended. I already knew. Let her explain this one. Let Brian stammer through the excuses. Let the silence rip them open like they had planned to do to me. For the first time in my marriage, I didn't stay to clean up the mess. I just walked away from it. I reached my car, got in, and drove away. The rear view mirror showed nothing but the dark street behind me. And as I turned the corner, leaving the glow of the party behind, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was a feeling of a heavy coat being taken off after a long, hard winter. I was cold, yes, but I was finally light. The courtroom smelled like old paper, floor wax, and the dry, stale air of air conditioning that has been running since the 70s. It didn't smell like justice. It smelled like bureaucracy. We grow up thinking that courtrooms are places of high drama, of screaming matches and gavels banging. But when you are sitting in the wooden pews, waiting for your life to be dismantled, you realize the truth is much quieter. It is just a room where strangers decide who gets to keep the toaster and who gets to keep the memories. Megan sat across the aisle. She had her hair tied back in a severe, neat bun, her lips pressed tight into a thin line. She was wearing a charcoal gray suit, modest, unassuming. It was the kind of outfit you wear when you want to look like a victim of circumstance rather than the architect of a disaster. Her lawyer, a polished man with an expensive tie and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, leaned in and whispered to her constantly. They looked like they were crafting a story, stitching together a narrative that could hold water. My attorney, Mitchell Hayes, sat beside me. He was silent. He didn't whisper. He didn't fidget. He sat with his hands folded over a thick manila folder, staring straight ahead. He didn't need to build a narrative. He had the truth. And in a room full of noise, the truth is the only thing that doesn't need to shout. The judge called us forward. He was an older man, spectacles perched on the end of his nose, looking tired. He looked like he'd seen 1,000 marriages end in this exact room, and none of them had surprised him. Megan's lawyer stood first. He smoothed his jacket, adjusted his cuffs, and began to speak with a practiced cadence. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth as oil, "my client is not contesting the paternity evidence presented by the plaintiff. She acknowledges a mistake regarding the biological parentage." He paused, letting the word mistake hang in the air like a harmless little cloud. "However," he continued, pivoting, "we ask that the court consider the emotional context of the situation. Mrs. Harper was living in isolation. She felt emotionally abandoned in a marriage where communication had long broken down. She was acting out of fear, confusion, and a desperate need for stability. There was no malice here, Your Honor, only a woman who was lost." I sat there, stone-faced. I didn't move. I didn't scoff. I just watched the judge. He nodded slowly, jotting something down on the legal pad in front of him. It was a good story. It was sympathetic. It painted me as a cold, distant husband and her as the lonely, confused wife. And yet, the judge said, not looking up from his writing, she falsified medical records. Megan's lawyer shifted his weight. "It wasn't falsification, Your Honor. It was an error in judgment during a time of extreme stress." She told the hospital staff Mr. Harper was a father. The judge said flatly, "That is not stress. That is a statement of fact that was untrue." "It wasn't premeditated, Your Honor," the lawyer insisted. Mitchell stood up. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply picked up the folder and opened it. "We have documentation, audio recordings, and a timeline that suggests otherwise," Mitchell said. His voice was deep, resonant, filling the empty space of the room. Mrs. Harper admitted her plan to the biological father weeks before Mr. Harper knew anything. She discussed the insurance implications. She discussed the reputational benefits of listing my client as the father. "That is not a slip of the tongue, Your Honor. That is a scheme." Mitchell slid a piece of paper across the table toward the judge. "Transcript A, line 14. He won't ask questions if I handle it right. That is the voice of someone planning a fraud, not someone suffering from emotional abandonment." The judge picked up the paper. He read it. He looked at Megan. "Mrs. Harper," the judge asked, his voice stern, "do you dispute what has been presented?" Megan stood up. She looked small. The gray suit seemed to swallow her whole. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting to Brian, who was sitting 2 rows back, head in his hands. "No, Your Honor," she whispered. Silence. The kind of silence that rings in your ears. Then came the ruling. "The court finds that Mr. Eric Harper is not the legal father of the unborn child," the judge said, his voice monotone, stripping the words of any emotion. "Parental rights are hereby removed. Mr. Harper will not be held responsible for any financial obligation, medical or otherwise, related to the child." I felt my chest rise. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding finally escaped. "The court awards Mrs. Harper the vehicle currently in her name," the judge continued. "However, given the evidence of attempted fraud, the court rules that the marital home and all jointly held savings will be retained by Mr. Harper as part of the settlement for emotional damages and legal fees. Legal separation is granted effective immediately." And then the final blow. And finally, the judge said, looking over his glasses at the back of the room, "Mr. Brian Harper will be listed as the legal father on the birth certificate and is to assume all parental responsibilities, including retroactive support, upon birth." I glanced across the aisle. Brian didn't even look up. He just stared at the table, his shoulders shaking slightly. He looked like a man who had just been handed a life sentence he wasn't prepared to serve. Megan's jaw was trembling. She looked at me, her eyes wet, pleading for what? Forgiveness? Acknowledgement? I didn't know. And for the first time in 7 years, I didn't care to find out. Case closed, the gavel banged. It wasn't a loud bang. It was a dull thud, but it was the sound of a door locking. As we stood to leave, Mitchell touched my shoulder lightly. It was the first human contact I had felt in hours. "You got everything you came for," he said quietly. I looked at the empty bench where Megan had been sitting. She was already being ushered out by her lawyer, a defeated figure in gray. "No," I said. "I got something better." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Closure," I replied. I walked out courtroom. The hallway was long and polished. My footsteps echoed, but they sounded different now. They didn't sound like the steps of a man walking into a trap. They sounded like the steps of a man walking away from a wreck. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the afternoon sun. The gray clouds from the previous days had finally broken. The sky was a piercing, brilliant blue. The air was crisp. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that felt cleaner than it had in months. I didn't feel triumphant. There is no triumph in watching the person you love get destroyed, even if they did it to themselves. I felt hollowed out, like a house that has been gutted down to the studs. But the rot was gone. The foundation was still there. And now, I could finally start to rebuild. I walked to my car, got in, and sat there for a moment. I looked at the passenger seat. It was empty. It would be empty for a while. And that was okay. Silence, I realized, wasn't always a bad thing. Sometimes silence is just the sound of peace returning. I started the engine. I didn't know exactly where I was going next. I didn't have a plan for the rest of my life. But I knew where I wasn't going. I wasn't going back to the lies. I wasn't going back to the doubt. I was driving forward, into a life that was finally completely mine. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I heard the knock. It wasn't a frantic pounding of someone in trouble. It wasn't the confident rap of a delivery driver. It was steady, hesitant, human. I was in the kitchen, brewing coffee. For the first time in months, I was making just enough for one. The house was silent, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of a waiting room anymore. It was the peaceful silence of a library or a forest after storm. It was a silence that belonged to me. I walked to the front door, wiping my hands on a dish towel. I didn't check the peephole. I just opened it. There stood Emily. She looked different. The last time I saw her, she was covering her mouth in horror at a backyard barbecue, watching her life disintegrate. Today, she looked tired. There were deep lines etched around her eyes, and she wore no makeup to hide the redness of sleepless nights. Her hair was pulled back simply, but her shoulders were straight. Her chin was lifted. She didn't look broken. She looked like someone who had walked through a fire and was surprised to find herself still standing on the other side. "Hey," I said softly. "Hey," she replied. Her voice was thin, brittle. I stepped aside, holding the door open. "Want to come in? I have coffee." She looked past me into the house, into the space where she used to sit and laugh with a woman she thought was her sister. She shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "I don't need to sit. I needed to see you. I needed to ask you something." I nodded. I understood. Sometimes, stepping inside the memory is too much. I stepped out onto the porch instead, pulling the door shut behind me. The morning air was cool, smelling of fallen leaves and damp earth. Autumn was settling in. I leaned against the brick railing. She stood on the top step, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. She looked up at me, and her eyes were searching my face, looking for cracks. "How did you not break?" she asked. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, carried away by the breeze. I looked out at the street. A neighbor was walking a dog. A car drove by slowly. Life was going on, indifferent to our tragedies. I let the silence sit for a moment. I let it breathe. "I did break, Emily," I said finally. "I broke every single day. I just did it quietly when no one was looking." Her eyes shimmered, tears pooling but not falling. She nodded, understanding. "We think strength means standing tall like an oak tree in a hurricane," I continued. "But sometimes strength is just bending enough so you don't snap." I spent a lot of nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was the crazy one. "Some betrayals hit like earthquakes," she whispered. I looked at her. "Yeah, they knock everything down. But the good thing about an earthquake is that once the dust settles, you get a look at the foundation. You get to see what was actually holding the house up and what was just decoration." She gave a shaky, hollow laugh. It sounded painful. "Brian moved out yesterday," she said. I wasn't surprised. I didn't feel happy about it, and I didn't feel sad. I just felt the inevitability of it. I told him I couldn't do it, she continued, her voice gaining a little more steel. I told him I could handle mistakes. I can handle flaws. But I couldn't live with someone who could lie so easily to the people who trusted him most. If he could do that to you, he could do it to me. I nodded. That's a hard realization, but it's a true one. She looked down at her hands. He cried. He begged. He said it was a moment of weakness. And I asked, and I told him that character isn't defined by what you do when things are easy, she said, looking up at me. It's defined by what you do when you make a mistake. And he chose to hide. He chose to let you take the fall. That's not weakness, Eric. That's who he is. I pushed off the railing and stood straighter. That is something I respect. Emily, it takes a lot of courage to close a door when you're terrified of what's on the other side. She looked at me for a long moment. There was a shared understanding between us. We weren't friends in the way we used to be. We were survivors of the same wreck. We had both been passengers in a vehicle driven by people who were asleep at the wheel. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't a spark. It was the embrace of two soldiers meeting after the battle, checking to see if the other one was still breathing. I held her for a moment, feeling the tremors in her frame. When she pulled back, she wiped her eyes. She smiled again. Real this time. Small but real. I'm glad you're okay. Eric, she said. I am, I replied. And I meant it. Me too, she said. And then she turned. She walked down the steps, her boots crunching on the gravel path. She walked her car, got in, and drove away. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. I stood there for a while, watching the empty street. The sun was climbing higher, burning off the morning mist. I looked at my hands. They were my own. I looked at the house behind me. It was just brick and mortar, wood and glass. It wasn't a monument to a failed marriage anymore. It was just a house. And now, it was waiting for me to make a home again. I turned around and opened the front door. I walked inside. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. I poured a cup black, steaming. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten eggs in silence, the same table where I had tried to save something that was already dead. I took a sip. It was hot. It was bitter. It was good. I was alone. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel lonely. I felt whole. I felt quiet. And finally, I felt real. And that was the end of my story. Emily chose to walk away from someone she once promised forever to, all because he chose silence when the truth mattered most. She decided that living alone with integrity was better than living in a crowded house built on lies. Tell me honestly, did she do the right thing? Is trust something you can rebuild once the foundation is cracked? Or is it better to tear it down and start over? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read them all. And if this story hit you somewhere real, if it made you think about the quiet truths in your own life, don't forget to like and subscribe. I've got more to tell, and we're just getting started.